Kadash. Kadash is calling from a secret, undisclosed location, and he is a former Hebrew Israelite insider who is going to help just do a walkthrough of the timeline, but especially in the Hebrew Israelite history of the what I'm going to call the fractured 90s. Welcome to the Dividing Line, Kadash. What up, man?
Greetings. Peace.
Thanks for joining us, and maybe give a brief introduction of yourself before we jump into this thing.
My involvement with the Hebrew Israelite organization was throughout the 90s, very much in its heyday, where it emerged out of the, sort of the, kind of out of the dark, and primarily in Harlem, New York, and started going public with the street camps, Times Square, 34th Street, and a lot of that stuff, where they came out into the limelight really before the advent of the internet, and began to encounter people out there on the streets, and just started to make their waves pretty much. That was the era that I got involved.
Now, a lot of times, Hebrew Israelites don't really seem to have an awareness. Now, I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of dudes, especially the newer dudes, of their history, and they kind of act like this has always been there. Now, we're not really focusing on the old school stuff today, but we don't want to totally neglect it. So briefly say something about what you know about a man named Abba Bivens and his importance in this.
Yeah. Well, he goes back to the origins of what became UPK.
For everybody, that's universal practical knowledge. And a lot of times people just say the UPK because the first two parts of the acronym are sometimes changed, either IS or IC. So when you hear UPK or UPKer, it's someone affiliated with that stream of the movement. It's very Harlem, not as much Chicago. There's sort of a different stream there. We're really kind of focusing, as of now, on the New York side. Is that correct?
That's right. A completely different route out there in Chicago. Yeah.
Maybe in some ways, some healthier tendencies. I'm not saying it's all good, but from what I can ascertain, some healthier tendencies, perhaps?
I think so.
All right.
Definitely. I've spent time with those guys out there as well upon my leaving the school. But yeah, as far as Abba Bivens, he was the teacher of, I believe it was the Israelite school, the Torah, at that time. And he would have been Yaquab's teacher.
Who's Yaquab? Rabbi. Who's Yaquab?
Yaquab is AHRAYAH's father, the man that is credited for the 12 tribes. Chart and sign, the Lasharon Quadash.
Which is that alternative Hebrew?
Exactly.
Okay, now what's the time frame in general? When we go back to Abba Bivens, in general, we're in the late 60s?
Oh, that may go back about that far. Certainly. Before I was born. But for certain.
And there's a bunch of bunch of stuff that happens. You want to jump right into sort of the early 90s. Now, I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening before then, but basically things kind of grew, then they kind of split. But I mean, when do you jump on, and what was the stuff that happened right before you jumped on that you were aware of that was important when you talk about Hebrew Israelite history?
Yeah. I officially joined the school in about 95, so the second half of the 90s. To go back before that, you had the one solid school, which was ISUPK, Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge. My experiences with them were just, when I would be strolling through Manhattan, Midtown, I would come across the camps, had no idea who they were. And I thought they were something related to X-Clan at first, standing out there with the big staffs and decked out and stuff
For
like that.
those who don't know, X-Clan is a mid-90s kind of what you might call Afrocentric hip-hop group. But all right, I can see you say that. All right.
Yeah. A few years later, I ran into a brother who had I used to do music with, and hadn't connected in a couple of years. And next thing I'm seeing him, with a big Star of David on, massive sideburns. He's got a completely different demeanor. And so we had a conversation about, what he was into.
He looked like the Jewish Shaq or what?
Yeah.
I meant Shaft. So, that's what my pronunciation was, the Jewish Shaft.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So what's he say? What's he say when you talk to this man?
Well, it was actually in a hip hop nightclub, and I bumped into him. We had just finished performing, and I said, "Wow, what are you into?" Because I was always a seeker.
Right.
I used to like, walking through New York City and checking out what I used to call the different sidewalk religions.
Right.
The Muslims, the 5%ers, all these different groups, Rastafarians, whatever you have. And so I was curious what he was into, and I had asked him, "Hey, what are you, a Rasta now?" Because I saw the big shield of David, and he was like, "Hell no." Haile Selassie's a fraud. He's not a real Jew. And, from right there, we started going into the scriptures. He started showing me Deuteronomy 28.
Right.
And I had, kind of from the beginning, man, hook, line, and sinker, I had just bought right in.
What appealed to you about like his style of exegesis and the way he moved through, what grabbed you? If you could take yourself back, what was it?
Yeah, just the boldness and confidence in what he believed.
Right.
I had never seen anybody represent the Bible with that type of, I was used to churches, et cetera, and that sort of thing. I had never seen anyone appear to have a command of the scriptures like that. He was citing a lot of verses that, of course, you wouldn't talk about in church.
Right.
A lot of things out of the Old Testament, and looking at things in what seemed to be a deeper insight into the Bible. And I was intrigued. All
right.
I was absolutely intrigued by it and wanted to know more, and kept kind of coming around and learning and learning. It took me about 2 years to finally visit the school in my area. And originally I had went to the school. Me and a few brothers, a handful of brothers, had looked at some of their claims and found it, what about this issue right here? What about the Gentiles? Are they just reading right over this? And so it occurred.
Well, hold up. Can you give it? I know what you're talking about, but can you give an example? So, here's what happened. You're kind of getting familiar with some of the claims made by Hebrew Israelite proponents, and you're seeing things in the scripture as you study them that you feel are incongruent with the main thesis. Now, what are some examples of some things you felt like were bumps that you wanted to bring up or talk about?
In the Old Testament, the laws of the stranger.
Explain.
In the New Testament,
explain a little bit if you could.
Okay. You have, let me I have my e-sword here.
Well, I mean, you don't got to, quote. I'm just trying to give people an idea of things that don't match up,
Right. So I was looking at passages like Isaiah 56, let not the son of the stranger say the Lord has utterly separated me from his people. It said the Lord said, I will give them a name in my house better than that of sons and daughters. Passages like, thou shalt not abhor an Edomite,
Right. You see that? There's a new meme that's like, hey, it has a Hebrew Israelite dude, and he's like, follow the commandments, follow the law. And then it goes to the commandment that says, do not abhor an Edomite. And then it shows the Hebrew Israelite looking like, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now what I've heard is dudes basically say that's been abrogated in some way. For everyone to understand,
well, they said that back then. That was the retort that they had given me. Our first trip to the school was to we believed a lot of what they were saying, but we also had some issues with it.
Right.
A lot of passages in the New Testament about the Gentiles, and so our first trip there was to kind of discuss that with them.
Right. Okay. How'd that go? How'd that go?
In that here, it didn't. I think we were just sort of impressed with their presentation.
Okay.
And something clicked in my mind, and I said to myself, the passages on Gentiles in the scriptures are so prevalent and littered everywhere throughout the New Testament. They have to be they have to be getting around this somewhere. And something clicked in my head where I said, I guarantee you what they're going to say. I told a brother that I was going into the school. I said, I guarantee you what they're going to say is that these are not real Gentiles. These are Israelites in a Gentile state of mind.
Right.
And sure enough, that's exactly what they said, But
yet you joined, right?
And we kind of stuck around. We didn't, we kept coming up for a little while and hearing the other parts of the breakdowns and just being impressed with all these, young men that were zealous for, what we believe to be, the Lord's truth, the Lord's commandments, and stuff like that.
Well, before we get into some of the craziness with maybe the splits and the personalities, maybe share what you might call a positive or warm memory. You know what I'm saying? Because sometimes people look at this as all bad, but you see a lot of these groups, man, got a real brotherhood and kinship. And I remember you brought that up. I'd like you to hear a little bit, kind of share the inside of some of the good side of what it's like to be around this joint.
Right. Well, one of the things, it was sort of like joining a gang. You had, you were welcomed into a family. And the activity was far beyond. It was nothing like going to church.
Right.
Brothers were purposeful. They were disciplined. They were a unit.
Right.
They were organized. You had, like I said, you got into this family of brotherhood that, it was a very exciting thing. I said before, when you looked at the book of Acts and you saw like the constant movement of the disciples, the bonds that they had, they were always about their business. It wasn't something that you did part-time, like going to church on Wednesday night Bible studies and Sunday morning, and then you kind of went back to your life. Your life pretty much revolved around the school. Right. I mean, some of us were there every day.
And you said it was like if you got a new pair of socks, dudes knew about it.
Right.
But people got to understand, that's a certain level of community. And you shared one other thing about Francis Schaeffer with a new convert to Christianity. Can you share that briefly? Because I want people to see some of the appeal. Oh, it's Francis Chan? My bad. I thought it was Schaeffer. Okay, Francis Chan.
Yeah. Well, it was a short clip where Francis Chan had talked about a young gang member who had joined the church. And after a while, he stopped attending. Yeah. And so a couple of brothers from the church decided to pay him a visit to see how he was doing, and they asked him what was wrong. And, his response was that, he said, when I was in the gang and I got jumped into the gang, I had a family. Right. We were constantly together. It was ongoing, 24/7. If I wasn't with them, they were with me, and, right. It was like a pride, Yeah. So he said, I'm sorry. He said, I just had it wrong in my mind. I didn't realize it was just, Wednesdays and Sundays, like I had said. Yeah. And Francis Chan's response to that was like, no. He said, you didn't have it wrong. He said, the church has got it wrong. Right. And the point he was trying to make is that we need to be that community.
So before we switch over, man, I want people to stop for a second. Instead of just mocking people or however you want to get, and realize that there is a gap a lot of times in our evangelical communities and fellowships, and there's things missing a lot of times. And so you can see that there's a need there. And a group like the Hebrew Israelite, which we believe has a lot of false doctrine, has some other things. Yeah, okay.
Is that part of the package would often cause you to overlook some of the downside of it?
I think so.
Even if something clicked in your head did, I don't think those brothers are breaking that down right.
Right.
There was, you valued the brotherhood there so much that a lot of brothers, they wouldn't say that straight up in the environment there, but you might catch someone to be honest with you on the side. Yeah. But nobody was going to go against the grain, for sure.
Well, what were some of the things that were being taught? And here's what I really want to start focusing on. What were some of the developments you saw firsthand? Everyone, pay attention. So we're switching a little bit from personal to kind of more broad stuff going on. But what did you see some of the doctrinal developments and changes that were happening sort of right in front of your eyes?
Yeah. I came in at an interesting time, right? Because it was right at the cusp of the division between MASHA and AHRAYAH.
Who was MASHA?
MASHA was he was one of the 7 heads of the school. AHRAYAH had somehow dubbed him the reincarnation. These brothers believed heavy into reincarnation. Right.
Now, this is important, everybody. Yes. Reincarnation in most camps, I think GOCC rejects it, but reincarnation in a lot of camps is very, very important to them. And kind of a logical corollary, if you think about it, is, well, maybe we could figure out, like, who's who. So MASHA was a dude who got dubbed as King David. Now, who was AHRAYAH? Who was AHRAYAH supposed to be?
AHRAYAH was, as they would call him, John the Revelator.
Okay, all right.
He was John the Revelator.
Okay.
the very Apostle John. MASHA also supposedly had several reincarnations. He was Moses. He was also, King David, and he was the Apostle Peter.
Dang. This is kind of like Serpentor.
Yeah, this guy he wore a lot of big hats,
Yeah, check it out. If you've ever seen G.I. Joe, okay. In the 1986 series, they wanted a new leader because Cobra Commander was like dropping the ball, right? And so Dr. Mindbender and Destro went behind Cobra Commander's back, and they combed the tombs of all of history's greatest military leaders, such as Genghis Khan and Vlad the Impaler and Napoleon, et cetera, snagged their DNA, and then put it sort of into a genetic blender and made Serpentor, who's supposed to be like the ultimate Cobra Emperor. He's Julius Caesar and all these other dudes. And this sounds like what MASHA got going on a little bit.
Interesting.
I'm sorry. There's a couple of y'all that get that reference. But, okay, so that's who MASHA's supposed to be. We know who AHRAYAH is supposed to be. Yeah. Now, what's going on with those dudes, though?
Well, it was a mistake that AHRAYAH made that I think he later came to regret because he ascribed MASHA more authority and power than himself.
Right, because MASHA is King David and Moses. All right, okay.
There were certain verses in the Bible they would use, and the people will seek to their king. They also use one of the passages in Deuteronomy 28 about your king will go with you into captivity. Yeah,
this is a little side note, but I just noticed one of the problems with the interpretation of Deuteronomy 28 is something I just saw, our mutual friend point out on the Facebook group. He was saying, what king went with the folks during the transatlantic slave trade?
Right.
That was a killer. That's verse 27, right?
Right.
That's important. That's an important verse. And the way you guys he just got on asking the question, and you realize there's not really an answer to this. That was good.
That's because the emphasis is always, we're the only people who fit each and every exact prophecy in there.
Right.
They'll say that. They will say that. However, as we both know, there's only certain verses they'll necessarily grab out of Deuteronomy 28 that have anything in common with the transatlantic. So while they say that, well, you got to fit each and every detail to be the applicant for this prophecy, there's a lot that they glaze over as well.
All right, so let's talk about, is the first major break with MASHA splitting off, would you say?
Yeah, there was, as we talked about, there was the Sons of Thunder over in Brooklyn a little bit earlier on. I wouldn't exactly call it a split. It was just camps that did their own thing, their own way. And UPK ended up disassociating. They did come up to Harlem quite a bit, and a few of those Brooklyn brothers joined and moved out to Harlem. But for the majority, a lot of them stayed out there and kind of did things their own way.
So everyone knows there used to really be a lot more centralized unity in this movement.
Oh, for sure.
And what's interesting is people think that a nation-building thing is happening, but actually the opposite is happening. There's fracturing, and we're talking about these 90s splits, but now it's even more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that split is what, House of David? Is that correct?
That was called House of David.
Because MASHA,
King David,
is David. All right.
Remain loyal to MASHA. From what I understand, it's there was frequent. Right after that, there was frequent splits, and a lot of it had to do with personal differences, vendettas, even, and stuff like that. But it would always come out. It would always present as it was something doctrinal.
Right.
From what I understand, is MASHA and AHRAYAH went their separate ways over money, and AHRAYAH and those brothers from 1West ended up paying visits to the other schools and tried to sort of get out in front of that and give their explanation of why that went down. And AHRAYAH tried to retract on the MASHA was King David thing. He tried to downplay that and backpedal. Well, we're all reincarnated, but none of us are sure exactly who we are. We were wrong about that.
Right.
It was a little too late for some of the zealous true believers.
Did anybody ever tell you who you were? Did anybody ever tell you?
No. You had to be somebody really significant.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
So with that, then now let's look at House of David for a little bit. There was a split within that with Tahar, I believe, right?
Right.
What goes down with that?
That was the second split.
So everyone knows Tahar is still active, and I would say quite important. and what's going on in this. And from what I understand, is really the first man to get his camp to really utilize the power of YouTube, which is now kind of standard practice among the groups. But he was the one to really jump on that, and he's over GMS now, Great Millstone. And what's going on there with that split, Kadash?
Tahar goes way back.
Right.
He used to go out and street preach with AHRAYAH.
You can see him on Times Square and stuff, and a lot of times he's like AHRAYAH's reader even.
Yes. Yeah. He was a lot younger at that time. He was coming up in the ranks.
Yeah.
Tahar, for some reason, made himself a lot of enemies. He was kind of brash, and he stood his ground on whatever he believed. Didn't compromise too much. He had a loyal following.
Right.
And started to kind of lead his just naturally people sort of flocked to him. If you either loved him or hated him.
Yeah.
And as you see, he is somewhat of a charismatic figure.
I look, on a personal level, as I've gotten to know some of these guys, I like Tahar. He's always making jokes. He strikes me as funny. He's got like nicknames for everybody.
Tahar is a cool brother. Yeah.
And he always will like relate something to a movie. He'll be like, "What's that?" It just strikes me as this dude. Okay. But the funny thing is, he's over GMS, which is really the most tripped out crew, in my opinion. But yet, there's this dude that I kind of feel like a warm affection for. Like, check out this guy. All right, I could listen to him. I don't mean like it's accurate. I'm just saying on a personal level, kind of enjoying him. You know what I'm saying?
Right. He does. He was, he was always a showman on the streets, and he was one of the more enjoyable teachers out there to watch. Yeah.
I mean, I could say, if I could see going over to Tahar's house, kicking. I don't know if he'd have me, but Okay, so what's up with Tahar and Cornelius? Because my understanding is that's a key piece to all this going down. Tahar and Cornelius, explain.
Was the first brother. Tahar was the first brother. They always had a breakdown of Acts 10 and Acts 15 to do with Cornelius, because that was obviously sort of a monkey wrench in the Gentiles can't be saved doctrine.
Because it appears
always asked.
It appears Cornelius is not by any stretch of the imagination an Israelite. I mean, just read the text and you can see how Peter speaks to him. You can see the way he's described. So all of a sudden, this dude it looks like he's in the mix, right? So how do they explain it back then?
The explanation kind of jumped around a little bit. One of some brothers that go back into school will know what I'm talking about when I say the trick bag. They would always say the trick bag, the Most High, the white man in the trick bag. See, some brothers would admit that Tahar was one who would admit that Cornelius genuinely received salvation.
Right.
I remember him saying in one case, he said, because when we came with the gospel, Cornelius was the only one who bowed down.
Right,
and brothers frequently would teach that Cornelius was going to receive some type of mercy in the kingdom.
Okay.
Alms deeds toward the people of Israel, etc., and stuff like that. But no one ever came up with a satisfactory explanation of, well, if Cornelius could be saved, why not? Doesn't any other Gentile need to just do the same thing, become a devout and God-fearing man and receive the grace of God?
Do you know the answer to this? Did anybody ever say, well, dude was probably Italian, so he was still an Israelite? Did anyone ever go that route? You know what I'm saying?
Tahar was the first one to say that.
Oh, so the explanation, the modern explanation is via his, so I guess they'd probably be assuming he's some kind of Southern Italian, such as Sicilian or Napolitano, and then probably thinking through that he's able to have Israelite lineage, and so he legitimately is. So that's the current explanation?
That's pretty much as far as it goes. There's nothing in the text that says that. All the conversation that happens between Peter and Cornelius.
This is Acts chapter 10, everybody. Acts chapter 10 primarily. But then there's a follow-up in Acts 15. Go ahead.
Precisely. The follow-up in Acts 15, it emphasizes it even more.
Right, yeah. Just read it.
Yeah.
Okay, so Tahar comes out with this to kind of get around a problem. And what happens? What's the reaction?
Okay, he already had some rivalries going on before that.
Yeah.
There was two things that Tahar was teaching. He started saying that Cornelius was indeed an Israelite.
And here's the next one, everybody. Get ready for this.
Here's the next one. that in the kingdom, or when Israel receives their power, it's all right to rape women.
All right.
That would be raping women, ravage the women, and all that sort of thing.
Put a pause on that for a second. So that's why sometimes people use this. They call it the rape doctrine. Now GMS wants to make sure you know they're not talking about doing it now. They are talking about the kingdom, just so everybody knows.
Right.
We want to call it like it is.
Right.
However, I'll tell you, man, the Southside GMS crew that I ran into, which homeboy has resurfaced currently on YouTube. Shout out to my fellow Southsider. He would be in Schiller Park, place I used to play ball at, and while joggers are going around saying, "What OJ did to Nicole Brown Simpson is what's going to happen to all Edomite women in the kingdom. That was righteous to do." That's right. So it's kind of like a precursor to the kingdom, I guess. At least that's what. Now, I don't know if Tahar would say that, but this crew was saying that, and so GMS kind of has that. And so Tahar came out with both things at the same time. What was the result?
Well, okay. So at that time, some funny things were beginning to happen in the school.
All right.
MASHA was moving on in age. You had
hold on.
two
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I heard. Now you may not have to comment that some people suspect he may have been going senile.
Yeah, there was some evidence of that.
Okay.
It was shortly before his death.
Okay, go ahead and just
some people had whispered that.
Okay,
right.
Go ahead. I'm listening.
Sure. There was two upcoming leaders in the House of David school, which were Nathaniel Alaga and Rahab. Nathaniel Alaga now is who everybody knows as Nathaniel, who spearheaded the Israel United in Christ movement.
That's the camp. Whenever we talk about them, we refer to them as professional, polished,
very
organized, rational in a certain manner of speaking, yet still kind of hardcore in doctrine. I mean, they wear the purple and gold, so everybody can know,
They very much have all kind of been somewhat, that is very much Nathaniel or Nathaniel Alaga's persona.
Right, okay.
And he's kind of shaped, his group after himself, or they've modeled themselves after him.
Right.
So that was always his style and his approach. Rahab was a little more of a belligerent guy, more like some of the guys you would see in some of those more, rough around the edges camps on YouTube today.
Right.
So these guys were up and coming in the ranks, and they kind of became MASHA's spokesperson. Whenever there was, whenever they, as MASHA aged, he would send these guys out to follow up with the schools, going and, visit the different schools around and spur them on and that sort of thing, They began to develop a little bit of a different vision.
Right.
And my opinion is they wanted to take it in some new directions.
Yeah, okay.
And sort of a seize on the power seat.
So I've heard this talked about. Is this what you're going to talk about? Kind of sometimes referred to as the coup.
Yeah, I would say so. Yep.
Okay. So what happens? There's a council, right?
Well, one thing, the council didn't happen yet where they overturned MASHA. One of MASHA's loyal men was Tahar.
And there's where you can see his sort of what I would call maybe tendency towards personal affection and warmth comes in. Very loyal.
Oh, absolutely. He never stopped being loyal to both MASHA and AHRAYAH, no matter what differences he had with them.
Right, okay.
He still speaks of both of them very highly and with great regard and reverence. But I think, from where I was standing, Tahar was somebody who sort of needed to be moved out of the way.
Right.
He had a lot of weight. He had a lot of influence in the school.
Yeah.
He was dear to MASHA.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that they were going to take it where they wanted with Tahar still around.
So they had to find a pretense to bounce him out.
Right.
And the pretense they used was?
The Cornelius issue.
Which is ironic because what does almost every group teach now?
They all teach that now.
Yeah, they almost all do. Now. Except for GOCC, I think, right? I think they just got him as a Gentile.
Yeah, GOCC is, probably come the furthest out of the UPK groups.
Okay.
Any kind of orthodoxy,
Yeah.
So, as I was saying, I think Tahar saw the difficulty with the Cornelius breakdown, the trick bag thing. You know, where the Most High made it. There was always an explanation of why the Bible seemed to be saying one thing but really said another. Is almost whatever the Bible really seemed to be saying was the opposite. If the New Testament appeared to be saying you don't have to keep the law of Moses anymore, it was a special reason that you had to get to understand why it was saying you had to keep the law of Moses. If it appeared that it was saying the Gentiles could be saved, no, you had to delve into it deeper and find out. So almost everything that was manifest and obvious in the scriptures, you had to go for this, long walk around. And, they tell you exactly why what you were reading was not what it seemed to be saying. And it was the exact opposite. You know, Tahar, I think, was one of the first brothers that saw ahead that there was a difficulty in buttoning down the Gentile issue so long as Cornelius was a genuine non-Jew, a genuine Gentile.
Yeah, right.
There was also several people in Tahar's camp going way back who didn't look like typical quote-unquote Israelites.
Right. So, I mean, even in the modern era, there's the dude who led the Southside GMS Columbus crew that's kind of notorious because he looks like an Irish dude. Now, he'll call himself light-skinned, and that's why sometimes dudes are like...
really light-skinned.
You're right, yeah, light-skinned with red hair, and they'll say, yo, man, don't call us the Black Hebrew Israelites. Look at that dude over there, that type of thing. But, so, you're saying there were some dudes that seem like, well... You don't seem to fit the profile, but hey. All right.
Right. So, if they could vibe with what the teaching was.
Right.
Tahar is as you see, he claims to be able to read spirits.
Yeah.
So, he exercises that if somebody's, if somebody strikes him as Israel, then boom, they're Israel. Leonardo DiCaprio in Tahar's book is an Israelite.
Well, he is Italian,
Yeah, he likes his style, Yeah. Leonardo DiCaprio is a cool dude. So, we'll mark him down if we ever get a chance.
He might be Jake. He might be Jake. Let me stop. So Jake is short for Jacob. And a lot of times it's the way that an Israelite cat will refer to somebody who's sort of not awoke to the truth yet, but is of the proper lineage, is the way I would describe it. So they might say he might be Jake.
That's right.
So because prior to Israel, who is Jacob, well, let's abbreviate, break it down, speak with a little flavor, Jake. So there you go, so everybody can understand. Sometimes people talk about their Jake job. That's their job kind of outside they got to go do,
Right.
So learning the lingo.
Now, there was always a teaching that, they would quote certain scriptures, Israel is as a speckled bird. There was always a teaching that there were Israelites out there who didn't look like Israel.
Right, okay. Yeah.
But nobody ever, what do you do with that? Then you got to preach this thing to anybody, and whoever responds to it, you got to say they're an Israelite.
Now, you told me something, at least I heard it from somewhere, where sometimes in a modern era where Tahar will kind of be not feeling, let's say, Brother Nathan, he'll say, you're kind of looking like a Watusi right now.
You're starting to look like a Watusi to me,
now, I understand what that means, but can you explain that to somebody who's like, I don't really understand what you guys are saying right now? What's the significance of that?
Well, if I had a nickel for every time somebody left the school or had a fallout in the school and they were no longer dubbed an Israelite.
Yeah.
Same thing happened to me when I left the school.
Oh, what'd they call you?
Oh, you're an Edomite or something like that. Yeah, you're a Gentile.
Do they sometimes use the phraseology tear? So is it tear somebody who looks like an Israelite but is actually of the wrong ethnic lineage? Is that kind of the technical definition or what?
Yeah, that could be.
Okay.
That could be. Yeah, that's one of the possibilities there. So, like I said, they always kind of held that teaching that anybody might be an Israelite for all we know, but only Israel is going to respond to this truth.
Right.
Tahar was the first person to actually take them to task on that and say, well, let's make it because to them that was just a theory. No one ever actually brought a non-Israelite looking person into the school. So I was the first one.
It's interesting because sort of the most radical in the way they street teach, most people would say is GMS, but yet they're also the most open to say, yo, this dude may not look like, but he can be down with the crew. Even really more than GOCC, because GOCC still has these rules and regulations for so-called Gentiles where you got to be under the authority in a kind of clear way. You got to be kind of like commissioned. Your teaching needs to be monitored, that type of thing. It seems like GMS has a little bit more of an openness in that way, which is, again, highly ironic considering their whole approach and vibe. But, you know, it is what it is.
Right.
So MASHA dies. When does he die?
Not before Tahar got bounced out of the school.
Okay.
That was something that I was in the midst of. I was right in the eye of the storm at that council where they were kind of because I did have something to do with some brothers out there in the Bridgeport, Connecticut area that Tahar presided over.
Okay.
Became close with one brother in particular, and so every school leader or camp leader was kind of jealous over their men. They kind of want to control and keep them to themselves. They didn't really like people, sort of cross communication between other camps.
Yeah.
Which I kind of broke that. I became good friends with one particular brother, and because of that, some of the conversations that ensued, they wanted my input at the council.
Oh, okay.
It was really very manipulative. I didn't really understand what I was getting into the middle of. I was just a young man at that time.
Right.
But it was to frame and and get evidence against Tahar to boot him out of school.
Right. Okay.
It's true.
All right. So I mean, let's jump a little bit to the ICUPK stuff, Tazadakia and all that stuff. Like, this kind of...
Well, let me bring this one thing back, and you mentioned it before. Shortly after, now Tahar's out of the school. They disassociate from him. MASHA continued to have some concourse with him. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they would keep certain holy days together and stuff like that. Okay. And I think once those younger men saw that Tahar and MASHA still had a bond, that's when they had to attack MASHA now.
Oh, okay.
Right. Once, we got to get MASHA out of the way, and it's time for us to usurp, the reins here. And then they came out with things that were probably true, maybe somewhat exaggerated, but things that had been whispered since way back, that, some of those old elders like MASHA and them, AHRAYAH, that they had been dealing with Kabbalah, with certain types of Satanism, dealing with there was a book they didn't share with other brothers. They probably long since discarded it by the time I came around, but there was a book, The Seals of Solomon, where it was teaching you even incantations on how to bind and control demons and get them to do your bidding. Okay, so
I remember you mentioned this. So basically how to control demons. That was kind of an undercurrent. And you're saying they brought this out against MASHA, saying, "Hey, this is shady business," type of thing.
Exactly. It was a convenient time to bring those things forward. You know?
Yeah, I got you. So that's what they used for him.
Yep. They severed from MASHA. The school I was part of followed suit with Nathaniel Alaga and Rahab. Mm-hmm. That became 12 tribes of Israel.
Okay.
And that didn't last very long. It was shortly after that I left the school. Right. Because once they became 12 tribes, all of a sudden, the teaching surfaced that Cornelius really is an Israelite.
Yeah. So.
And I'm like, wait a minute. Then these guys owe Tahar and his camp an apology.
Right. When Tahar hears this show, I feel like he's gonna be like, listen, even these fools be vindicating me, something like that.
He's gonna feel somewhat vindicated.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But like we said, it is what it is.
Not that I endorse the things Tahar teaches on any level, Yeah. But that's just the way it went down.
Right.
That's the way it went down.
All right. So I want to look at the UPK stuff, though, because we kind of left that for a minute. But what's going on there? A lot of changes there, too, around this 94, 95, 96 type thing. What's going on there?
Yeah. UPK continued to be, they both continued to be rivals, House of David and UPK.
Yeah, okay.
As the countdown to the what becomes the, and I guess the brother will talk about that later on.
The year 2000 prophecy. We're going to talk about that at the very end of the show. So we're kind of really hitting the 90s kind of hard, and we're going to end this show today with the discussion briefly about the failed prophecy of the year 2000. So we're moving through the 90s, going to jump into that. So what's up with UPK and all that?
Yeah, I didn't. That was one group that since we split ways, I didn't have any contact with. We just would hear things. They had some web pages up at the time. They still had some programs going on in the New York area and some other cities and stuff like that. Some television programs, but we didn't really have much to do with them. They really despised us,
right.
But as the countdown to Y2K comes, I think they started to shift some positioning. Well, once it passes, there was a whole regrouping and adjusting themselves. Trying to get some new footing when their foremost prophecy ends up falling flat on its face.
Right. Jehovah's Witnesses all over again.
Yeah, which was funny because that was one thing they would always cite. The passage in Deuteronomy, both us and them. We started, House of David started to that prophecy started to take, a back seat.
You talking about Deuteronomy 18, the test of a prophet, test of a true prophet?
Well, yeah. Well, that's what I was saying before is that they would always mock the Jehovah's Witnesses and other, fringe Christian groups who had made these false prophecies, false predictions of the end of the world, and they would cite Deuteronomy 18. If that thing comes not to pass, you already know right there not to listen to anything else they say. But they didn't measure themselves, they didn't meet the same measure to themselves when their prophecy, bottomed out.
When a prophet speaketh in the name of the Lord, if the thing follow not, nor come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord hath not spoken, but the prophet hath spoken it presumptuously. Thou shalt not be afraid of him. With UPK, what are some of the changes going on there? I see
changes.
We got Tazadakia, I see there, and we got Yeshaya getting kicked out.
Right. Yeshaya is kicked out. Let me just see here.
And then it gets transformed into ICGJC. What's their importance? Because not everybody knows them, but for a long time they were the biggest. Maybe they still are. And they've got AHRAYAH, which to me is a boon. I mean, what I'm saying is AHRAYAH is kind of like the brainchild of a lot of this, and he's with this group. Explain a little bit about that.
Well, AHRAYAH is like the golden goose, So much of the doctrine was put out there and developed by him. The old belief was that he was actually encountered an angelic being who revealed the Hebrew Israelite doctrine to him, and none of this stuff.
When was
this
always
presented?
Is that the dude that taught him the language? That said, "Hey, this is the tongue our forefathers spoke." Is this story?
I'm not certain about that.
Okay.
I'm not certain about that.
Maybe we'll do that on next week's show. By the way, everybody, plan as of now is to do a part 2 of this, but it's actually going to be like a prequel. Going to kind of go back into even some more of the old school stuff and discuss its modern day relevance. This is really focusing a little bit on the 90s and early 2000s. So what's up with Israelite Church of God, Jesus Christ?
I think all those changes happened after the prophecy failed.
Okay.
Tazadakia, Jermaine Grant takes a trip. They take a trip out to Israel, the Mount of Olives or something like that. He supposedly receives his revelation. Reminds me of the same kind of AHRAYAH stories all over again. Had a divine encounter,
What is
he is
the revelation?
The Comforter, the Holy Spirit incarnate in the flesh.
Say that again.
That he is the Holy Spirit, the Comforter, incarnate in the flesh.
Just want to make sure everyone understands that, which is a certain advantage to that, because if you got to be King David, that's kind of like a heavy expectation. You got a certain personality, and if you're the Holy Spirit, what I mean,
that kind of trumps King David, doesn't it?
I mean, it's like, hey, I got the king. Oh, I got the ace, type of thing. So it does trump him, and also you can kind of shape the Holy Spirit. I mean, we're speaking crassly, but kind of how you want. So it's like, oh, okay, and this is the same man who, and I made a mistake in a previous interview, which I've apologized several times for. This is the man called Comfy who made the 12-inch action figure doll of himself, which the doll manufacturer did not make dark enough, and so the doll manufacturer got sued because it was too light. This is the man who did that. So there is a cult of personality, I think, around Comfy. I mean, if he's the Holy Spirit, that kind of makes sense, right?
Right.
Now tell me this though.
But they always were big on marketing. Whatever overpriced books and artwork and garments and things like that. They were always big on marketing and drawing. Some of these guys were riding bicycles and stuff like that, while the elders, were riding expensive cars and things. They basically, it was a business pyramid in a lot of ways. They drew the funds from their congregation. And, back then, like I explained to you in another conversation, the doors would be barred at the end of the night come, the time when it was supposed to pay your tithes. And men had to produce their check stubs so they could know that you were giving you 10%.
Dang, I didn't know that. It's funny because I remember we were talking the other day, and your boy was like, hey, don't you kind of want to pin this one dude down and ask him, like, hey, do you believe this, or is this a hustle? And the dude was like, man, he was giving a hypothetical answer from one of these older leaders and be like, man, it's New York City. Of course it's a hustle. You don't talk about it. Right. By the way, that was hypothetical.
No faster than Harlem, 125th Street.
Right. Just so everyone understands, we're not saying that was an actual dialogue we were reconstructing a hypothetical dialogue, so everyone understands that conversation did not actually happen. People be misinterpreting so much, man. I gotta stop and qualify. But okay, so how do you think it was that AHRAYAH was willing to say that Jermaine Grant was the manifestation or incarnation of the Holy Spirit? I have not figured that one out yet.
Yeah, I can only give my opinion, but I think his AHRAYAH also is aging.
Because he's an older man, and he dropped a lot of this stuff. It's just shocking that he would, because from what I heard, Jermaine was a cameraman prior to this.
Right. Yeah, you can see him in some old videos, even the Louis Theroux videos.
Right.
Interesting, because AHRAYAH changed his position on so many things. As you know, he went from denying the virgin birth, even denying the opening chapters of the book of Luke.
Oh yeah, I remember I heard about the council where at the end, AHRAYAH says, "Well, the book of Luke is a lie."
That's a lie.
Because it was, I guess, by a Gentile. Was that the rationale with that?
Well, I don't know. That's a good question.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, or either it was inserted in there by the white man or something like that, Right. But I knew the brothers who actually were there and heard him say that. Right. He was kind of outgunned with what the scriptures say there in the book of Luke.
Right.
And just, he had to, it's funny because by him saying that, he tacitly admits the book of Luke really is saying.
Right, yes.
That's born of a virgin.
Yeah.
And I don't have any defense for that. I can't talk my way out of it, so I'm just going to dub it a lie.
Right, there you go,
Yeah, which of course today he's backpedaled on that, and now asserts and affirms the virgin birth. They now affirm the deity of Christ, which they never did.
Okay, now that tripped me out too, because generally speaking, we say the Israelite groups denigrate Christ into some lesser status, but Israelite Church, God, Jesus Christ, who has Holy Spirit, God sent Comforter in the mix at the helm, You can see some pictures of him online where he's rocking all yellow suit. Man, this dude put together a messed up meme. I'm just going to tell you about it real quick. It had a picture of the Michael Jackson jacket, like the old school, kind of Thriller era jacket. And then it had a plus sign, and it had a batch of bananas. And it had the equal sign of Jermaine standing there in his yellow banana-looking kind of suit with the studs and type of thing. I'm sorry, man. The internet is a deep, dark place, and when you start getting to the world of Hebrew Israelite memes and counter memes, you're in a whole nother level. Yeah. But okay, go ahead. Sure. So really, no good explanation. It seems like with AHRAYAH, what's going on with him, and he's still alive today. I would love to hear an interview with this man.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
really get inside.
Another thing is, what does that do to the claim that this doctrine was handed to you by angels?
Right. If you flipping and flopping and this and that, yeah.
Right. Which was a thing that started to shake my faith in the movement when I was part of it, because when I entered, these brothers presented as so bold, so confident about their handle on the scriptures, and when I actually got to be part of it, I noticed there was this never-ending shuffle.
Right.
about interpretations and breakdowns as we know to be true.
Yeah.
The Bible only, you can proof text and cherry pick and get that Bible to say anything you want it to. If you just grab, like their thing here a little and there a little, you can make that Bible say anything you'd like to hear. But if you arrange it in a way that everything the Bible has to say on a particular topic, you have to add into you have to take account for and give account for before you arrive at the conclusion, at the interpretation. That's a different type of, that's exegesis.
Right.
That's a different type of...
Eisegesis is where you put something into the text it's not there. Exegesis is where you draw out of the text what actually is there. Hey, yo, our homie Abu's waking up on Twitter. Let me say a couple things that he said, and then you can comment on that.
Greetings, greetings.
Yeah, what up? I think I heard him say all praises. All praises. I think I heard him. With the transition to the ICGJC comes an embrace of the virgin birth, even the perpetual virginity of Mary, Christ's divinity, also a literal hell, overturning the old breakdown of Revelation 9. Those are big changes, and this is why I hear sometimes people will say ICGJC is kind of like the Orthodox, if you wanted to make some kind of rough comparison within Christendom, so-called, or perhaps the Roman Catholic version or something out of the camps, because you kind of have a popish figure there with Comfy. By the way, Abu also notes Comfy is a slur used by the rivals. He calls himself Tazadakia and the Comforter, just so everybody knows. And I think Chief High Priest or something like that too. But so that means now we're embracing the virgin conception. We're embracing Christ as truly divine, embracing an actual eternal conscious torment idea in hell, and overturning the way Revelation 9 used to be broken down. Those are big changes. Which, I mean, actually good changes, it seems like. You know what I'm saying?
Well, they did revise a lot of things and started to step in the direction of, on some issues, Orthodox Christianity.
Right.
And they always kind of had a leaning toward that. They were the most, so they always had like these Catholic and Eastern Byzantine influences in UPK. I remember early back on when they were selling the icons, the black icons of the, that brothers would paint of the saints and Christ and stuff like that. They were almost giving this, the same kind of, attributing a certain quality to these pictures that, sort of like the windows of heaven teaching from the Eastern Orthodox.
Yeah, sort of almost bordering on veneration type thing.
Sure.
See, that's interesting,
the fact
man.
That they had a priesthood,
Yeah.
They're the ones with the most, that made the most issue out of the priesthood. Mm-hmm. Other groups kind of tended, I always look at it almost like UPK was a sort of the Catholic Church of the Israelites. And then you had this Protestant break off almost where they ended up discarding a lot of traditions that had, came to be part of their practice and belief.
Now, real quick, it's sort of a side note, and I'm gonna let you probably say one more thing after this, and we're probably gonna jump into that 2000 prophecy. But what's the significance if someone's not tracking of this virgin conception idea in the first place? Why is that even an issue for Israelite groups? The virgin conception. Why is it important whether Christ was virgin born or not?
Yeah.
To them.
Well, I mean that's a good question.
Oh, I have a theory. I thought you had a ready-heady. I got a theory. If you want to hear mine first.
Well, I'll share mine too.
Okay.
Is that some of it is a lot of their interpretations is simply being at odds. Simply being at odds with what the mainstream Christian teachings
So you
are.
think it's just a product of contrarianism? They just like to be contrarians?
Very much. These guys are a bunch of contrarians, man.
Yeah. You ever heard the old joke?
Whatever you see in the Bible that seems to say, I was just looking at something, Brother Faithful had still made the distinction that the ICGJC still teaches that Christ is a created being. So they did retain some of their old doctrine. Right. But they do ascribe divinity, deity, divine status to
You ever hear the old joke, I tried to give this book to a contrarian friend of mine called Letters to a Young Contrarian, and he wouldn't take it. I always thought it was funny. I heard it from Christopher Hitchens, believe it or not.
And just one of the brothers, a brother named Lawyer, who I used to fellowship with on a regular, he left with Lahab and that crew back then with Central Command. And he always thought it was significant that the first miracle that we encounter in the New Testament is the virgin birth. And he always felt like it was significant that they denied that.
Right. Well, isn't it because if you're making a big deal out of lineage and being ethnic Israelite, and the way you track it on, according to most groups, is your pop side, because it goes like this. The Gospel of the 12 Tribes chart is almost preached like this on the street. You stop, you talk, and they say, "What's your nationality?" "Well, I'm such and such." "On your mom's or your dad's side?" You see? And it's got to be on your pop side. So believe it or not, everybody, most so-called Hebrew Israelite groups deny that Bob Marley could be saved in a sense because his pop was, in their dictionary, an Edomite. And so Bob Marley, for example, chanting down Babylon and everything else, is actually an Edomite because on the pop side he got the wrong thing going on, which is kind of trippy.
Unless you come across some brothers who really dig Bob Marley.
Yeah, and they're like, well, maybe they start singing a redemption song. So
right.
So with that, so there's just so much going on. So what's he say here? Opposition to the virgin birth seems rooted in their Tanakh-only anti-Christian origins and emphasis on paternal lineage. So we haven't really discussed the Tanakh-only Israelite section that exists. Zion Lex is one of the most well-known proponents, probably. At least, he's a well-known proponent of the Tanakh-only side, and we haven't got much into that. Most of these folks in some way embrace New Testament and Christ and all that as Messiah, but there is also the Tanakh only as well. Okay, so
it's interesting that going further back to Abba Bivens' day, they were a Tanakh and Torah only as well.
Yeah.
Yaquab, I believe, from the stories I heard, was the first one to introduce Christ in the New Testament.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so
I mean, this goes back. You had the black Jew. I mean, this is going further back. Like you said, we're going to have an addition on that as well.
Yeah, talk about like the commandment keepers, for example.
Yeah, it's the Moorish temple of Moorish Jewish temple of Harlem, the black Jews of Harlem.
Yeah,
and that sort of some of them which was just identical to rabbinical Judaism.
Yeah, got some old books on that. Here's one. This is an old school book, Howard Brott's The Black Jews of Harlem. Now, some of the languages in here is a little outdated, meaning sometimes he speaks in certain ways about ethnicity that I would prefer he not, but the book's a product of his time. But as far as being an up-close encounter of some of the stuff popping off at that time with the commandment keepers and whatnot, which we're not really discussing today, great book on that. Let me see, I think I got one more. Let me just mention it real quick, because there's some history on some of this stuff. There's not a ton, but there's some things, and so just bringing that out. Where did that other one go I had? I can't find it right now, but whatever, we can get to that. It's called Heritage Seekers. It's another one on a similar type of track. But yo, man, one more thing you want to say, maybe tie this together, because we kind of just went back. We did a full circle when we dropped Abba Bivens. One more thing you want to say about the fractured 90s, about all the stuff, because here's my understanding of the point of why I wanted to do this today. Yeah. Things are presented within the camps as if we've got our ducks in a row. Everything's lined up.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? There it is. Button up tight. Ain't nobody handling the scriptures like us type of thing. We're trying to peel back the curtain, show you there's a man back there. We're trying to take you to the hot dog factory, show you how the hot dogs are made. We're trying to shine some light on the reality of it. Now, this is not to say that there's no development and personal and political conflict within Christian church history. That's not the point of this. Meaning, we recognize that as well. Just study church history. You see it. But the point is that these groups tend to act like that's not them type of thing, and sort of as if they dropped out of nowhere with the stuff, and especially with everybody kind of being exposed to it on the internet when it's like their first time, and they're like, oh, okay, all right. You got to understand, man, this stuff has a lineage, and it's really messy. And my prediction is, as this thing grows, it's gonna get messier. Final words from you, my man, though. What you want to say before we bring our boy on?
Yeah, that's what led to my exit, of the school in the late '90s. Is that the more you try to this ongoing shuffle, they were hammering it out. It became evident to me that they were making it up as they went, pretty much. They were hammering it out, and make a statement, retract it, go back to it, revise it, say the opposite of what they were saying. And when you do that, you try to have. You grab certain verses and you try to arrange them in a way that says what you'd like it to say or what you've already preconceived the Bible to be saying. And then you have all these problem verses that are popping out and glaring at you over here on this side. That's no way to approach biblical interpretation. Your duty to have any kind of integrity in biblical interpretation is to hold on. You don't come to the sum before you've done the equation.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you don't have the answer already in hand. And this shows the importance.
I'd like the answer to come up to 777. So I'm going to tailor and omit certain things so that we arrive at the answer I've already decided to get.
Yeah.
And I think that started to provoke some second guessing and some doubt in some of those guys. After we left the school, a whole bunch of brothers shook loose.
And this is where it gets presuppositional, because when dealing with the Hebrew Israelite cats, and when you start flipping to the text, I'm going to tell you, man, their presuppositions drive their exegesis, which makes it eisegesis. Sometimes I've heard people dub it narcigesis, which is kind of a little bit whatever. But what you see is the presupposition is driving it, and that's why when clear language gets subverted, and all of a sudden Gentile doesn't mean Gentile whenever it doesn't mean Gentile, not because of really linguistic considerations. Now, they'll try to say that. They become more sophisticated. Like you listen, to AHRAYAH or somebody like that, and it sounds like, oh, okay, but you kind of stop and say, what actually are you saying and all this, and where's the consistency in this? And then you see the problem is presuppositional, because the thesis is driving the interpretation. Now, let's just say, I'm just reading the text, I'm just reading what it says, but they're assuming a certain interpretation as they do that. And so people need to be made aware, and I think what I want to see Christians do and engage in a respectful manner, according to 1 Peter 3:15 and Colossians 4:5-6, is to hammer in on those presuppositions to show our friends in this movement every time their presuppositions are being exposed, because what they end up doing is crafting the Word of God more into their own image instead of letting it shape them.
Right, which was a big, milestone that I crossed. I said, wait a minute, I had to humble myself and surrender to if I wanted to understand the scriptures, I had to surrender to what the text was really saying. It was the only way that it was going to work out, where there were no problem verses anymore.
That's right.
Another thing, I'll add this last thing. That certain brothers were a man would be applauded and lauded if he were a guy that could come up with a certain, an insight into the scripture to support the things they wanted to say. Yeah. You dig what I'm saying?
Problem solver.
If he could get in there and mine for something that supported their presuppositions that they already had, it was like a big round of applause. Right. Oh man, that brother, he went and dug dug in there, and he found more evidence to confirm that we're really right about what we're saying. Right. That was interesting too.
How many roads, too many signs, I can't read them. Wouldn't recognize the turn even if I seen it. Been driving